Hey, it's the Nazarite bringing you Hebrew lore from days of yore. And in this week's Torah portion, we begin the book of Leviticus, Vayikra, with the first Torah portion of the same name, Vayikra. The book of Vayikra is also called the Law of the Priests because it deals a lot with the different sacrifices and the services and the rituals which would go on in the tabernacle and later on when the temple was built in the temple. So there is a ton of animal sacrifice in this book. There is a ton of blood. There is a ton of just technicalities of ways of doing things just so. This was a very important thing. The services and the rituals were very, very precise, be it in the tabernacle or in the later on in the temple. The priests had to be of a certain mindset, dressed in certain clothing, facing in certain directions, reciting certain words, saying certain blessings. It's a whole big thing. And it was very precise. The tabernacle and temple themselves were filled with sacred geometric patterns. You know, the altars had to be in a certain way, in a certain direction, as was the menorah, the lamp, or whatever it's called, as was the table, and of course the Ark of the Covenant, which rested inside the holiest of holies. So there's a lot of precision that comes into the physical ritual worship as it is stated in the scripture. You know, in this day and age, not even in this day and age, everywhere, anytime, God is with you. And if you open your mouth and speak, you know, your woes, what you're grateful about, you know, all that stuff, just speak, just pray, spontaneous prayer, which is my favorite, in your own language, already there is a connection to God. But the rituals, the sacrifices, those sort of worked through different pathways in order to bring certain types of energy down into the world, excuse me, or into a specific individual, into a specific place. The sacrifices and everything that entailed, it was set up in such a way that when you do it properly, there's a certain energy that is being that was being channeled down into the physical world. You can call it a blessing, you can call it, you know, it facilitates a certain revelation of God, which is why there were sacrifices that were done daily. There were sacrifices conducted and carried out weekly, monthly, annually on the different holidays and festivals that corresponded with the agricultural, you know, with the seasons. And then there are the individual sacrifices, which one would bring if they sinned, right? If they missed the mark and they were not aware of it, and later on they were made aware of it, they'd bring a peace offering, a sin offering, a guilt offering, different types of offering. Some of them are animal sacrifices, some of them are vegetarian. I'll put a link somewhere in the description or up there. I'll put a link where I speak of the peace offering sacrifices, not the peace offering, the vegetarian offerings. In a different video, I spoke of the fact that I think that the third temple will be a vegetarian one, or eventually will be a vegetarian one. I won't get into it now. So the book of Leviticus is a little difficult to understand nowadays. Now that not the technicalities, those you can pretty much understand. We have the oral traditions which were codified and written down, the Mishnah, the Gemara, right, the Talmud, which state exactly how these things were carried out. And there is some debate of certain things, but eventually the different sages came to an agreement, let's say, on how things would transpire or should transpire. And the Rambam, Maimonides, who wrote down all of the law for these rituals and services, even though there was no temple at the time, he took it upon himself to write everything down and come to conclusions on certain difference of opinions and debates that were ongoing or that were carried out in the oral traditions, and he wrote them down. So why animal sacrifices? It's a very loaded question. Seemingly, if God is everywhere and I could reach him through speech and through my own kind of worship, why whittle it down to a specific place in a specific time with a specific animal using a specific person, the priest? Why get all precise and technical and really kind of anal about it And it is, because if you do things wrong, the sacrifice does not count, and you need to do it again. Something along those lines. Why is it, if God is everywhere, omniscient, omnipresent, right, that whole thing, why is it that we as human beings created in his image, why do we need to be so very precise? Now, I feel that's because we need a kind of precision. I can't put my finger on it. I know that in the wait, hold on. Okay. I think that the Torah is trying to teach us the value of precision and of doing things as a congregation, as a people. And this makes a big difference. If it's just you, you can do whatever you want, but not a congregation. If you have a congregation that's always doing everything and anything at once, that could lead to chaos. You need order. You need structure. It's true to the individual, and it's true to the public, a congregation, a people, a nation. There's a big debate on, where is the line, freedom of will, and of choice and of expression, all that. I'm not saying you should stop people from doing, people should be free. But when it comes to worshiping God, and I mean that in like the physical ritual service worship, like it was carried out in the tabernacle and the temple, it seems to be very precise, very precise. And the building itself is very precise. It had to be made this way and that way, like this and not like that. And it fascinated me, and it still fascinates me, because it's within those seemingly not unimportant, but very, very technical, very complex even rules and guidelines. It's through that narrow path that you can find a wider understanding. It's the hourglass thing, where you start off with infinite potential and it gets, narrower, and then through that narrow path you're able to open up again and rediscover that potential in more of a structured kind of way. I'm not an anarchist. I do believe in structure and I believe in order. I also believe in chaos, but I believe there should be a balance. As for animal sacrifices, I think that in a different video, I'll go back to the original sacrifices, which were Cain and Abel and Noah. That's when we first hear of the idea of animal sacrifice and vegetarian sacrifice in the story of Cain and Abel. But since this is the book of Leviticus, let's stick to this parsha, to this Torah portion of Leviticus. It's not an easy thing to understand because we don't do it nowadays. Nowadays we have prayer to be in this instead of the animal sacrifices. When you pray, when you fast, when you give something up, when you do something, whether it's passive or active, in the name of, righteousness and worship of God, it's as if you actually did make a sacrifice of living flesh. But you didn't. Incidentally, there are a couple or more of Jewish sects nowadays that still practice animal sacrifices, that still, the sacrificial offering of the Passover, and maybe one other, I don't recall. I think the Samaritans, the modern day Samaritans, are one of them. So the reason why it seems very foreign and barbaric to some people is because we don't do it nowadays. But I think that certainly back at the time when that was the norm, and even worse things like human sacrifices, certainly back then when it was the norm, it was the idea of you taking a living thing, a living, breathing thing, and watching it be slaughtered right in front of you with a sharp-ass knife, watching the blood gush out of it and be thrown onto the altar. And then, depending on the type of offering, some would be completely burnt, and some of it would be offered on the altar, and the rest would belong to the person who brought it in, or to the priest, or both. It seems very foreign. It seems downright barbaric, but I get it. In some ways, I get it. Because the whole idea behind sacrificial offerings is you deciding, I want to change. It's not just divine commandment. Although there is that aspect of it. It's also the reason you do it is because you understand something and you want to change. You want to rectify, you want to make a difference in yourself and in your environment and in your relationship with the Most High. So you bring a living thing and you kill it. And the thoughts that would go through my head if I were ever to do that are, it should have been me. I made a mistake. I missed the mark. I failed in some way. And I should pay for my own mistakes. But I want to do better. And that's through life. And in order for me to live and carry on and change for the better, I need to give something up. So right now I'm going to give up this lamb, this ox, this whatever it is. I'm going to kill this thing, this living, breathing creation, so I will be able to carry on and become a better living, breathing creation. I think that even though it was conducted all the time, there is still something very, I don't know, even if it was, well, I'm not going to say what I was about to say, but a living sacrifice is not a simple thing. I mean, even now when we have meat at every store and supermarket and slaughterhouses in every town or city or I don't know what, I still don't see it as something normal. I see it as something that needs to get us to think about living things and about what it means to kill. I mean, I've gone through these feelings as well back when I was in my service, be it mandatory or reserve. Um, and up to my recent military service a couple of years ago, where I was called in. So the book of Leviticus is full of blood and flesh and inner organs and just full of death. And as a Nazarite, I seek to embrace life and accept death in certain ways, but refrain and abstain from it. So it's a little difficult, not difficult, I guess, in a personal sense, difficult to read in this week's Torah portion about all the different sacrifices and how they would, their blood would be spilled, or rather, taken and thrown on the altar, and what would be with the different inner organs. You wash them, you put them on the altar, they're burnt up. It's something that seems so foreign, but it's also something that makes sense. It does make sense. The element of sacrifice makes a lot of sense, be it animal, vegetable, or mineral, whatever it is. It makes sense to me that in order to get something, you need to give something. That part of it I get. And I also understand why back in the day, in the tabernacle and the temple, and even up to this day, for certain sects, I understand why they need that physical being, that they're slaughtering it and spilling its blood. When you see something like that, if you really put your mind to it, if you're really mindful of what is happening in front of you, there's a chance that it could change you a little bit. When that priest or someone else, not just the priest, anybody could slaughter it. The priest had to do the other parts, but anyone could actually do the slaughtering. If you do that, or if you're witnessing that, and you're being mindful of what is being carried out in front of you, it's very difficult, I suppose, unless you're like really used to it and it becomes, and you become, uh, and your feelings are kind of blunted because of that. You would think, oh wow, it should have been me, but I'm here to carry on and become better. And this living thing, which I'm ending its life, I'm deciding that its life is going to stop now, but mine is going to continue, and I should make the most of it because it just as easily could have been me and having my blood spilled. Something along those lines. That's where the element of sacrifice really, really comes in. And again, it's not just animals, it's anything that you give up. If you do it with the proper mindset, it can be beneficial, whether it's for a set period of time or for life. Anything that you give up in the name of righteousness, and I mean that in a positive way, is something that's worth investing in, at least for a time. The book of Leviticus has a lot of, and this week's Torah portion, amongst all of the animal sacrifices, there's also one vegetarian offering, which obviously is my favorite. It's one of wheat and of oil and frankincense. If I'm not mistaken, it's frankincense. So there is also that aspect, and well, I have more thoughts on the vegetarian offering, but I won't get into them right now. I hope and pray that we all have a wonderful Sabbath and a wonderful new book of Leviticus. Leviticus, in some ways, is problematic in a more modern sense, but you can also learn a lot from it, because within those technicalities and very strict guidelines and rules, there is freedom. Within those limitations, there is real liberation of the spirit. And it might take some time to get into it or figure it out. It took me a very long time to figure that out. That within the limitation, there is real freedom. And I see that in art. I see that in my line of work, because I'm a writer. I see how that's the case. So even though the book of Leviticus may seem very barbaric, very archaic, very foreign, because we don't even have a place to make the sacrifices nowadays, no tabernacle, no temple, it's still irrevocably part of the human condition, certainly of the Jewish, the Hebrew faith, and the prayers that were created or written down and passed down from generation to generation that come instead of those sacrifices, those are meant to achieve those same flows of energy from on high down to this physical world. The priests and the people, the Levites and the Israelites who would carry out the services and rituals in the temple and the tabernacle, those very same actions are now, they sort of metamorphosed into text. The prayers that were written down and that were put in the that people say every single day, 3 times a day, and annually, monthly, and weekly on the Sabbath. These are prayers that correspond with the different rituals that were carried out. There's an order to the prayers. You're supposed to say certain things at certain times, and sit down in certain times, and stand up in certain times, and bow in certain times, and be silent or with a louder voice. All of that facilitates that same flow of energy that the ancient rituals used to bring about. So I hope and pray that we have a wonderful week's end, and I will see you in the next video. And if you stayed so far, like, comment, subscribe, and be well. God bless.